All right, so in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about some alternatives to plant expansion. So in a prior video, I noted that some businesses expand right near the top of an economic cycle, and that tends to be rather painful for them later if the economy slides into a recession. And again, as I've repeatedly emphasized, I'm not suggesting that you can figure out exactly where the top of a cycle is or exactly where the bottom is. But if you get even closer in terms of evaluating the economic circumstances and so forth, then you want to be prudent about what choices you're making. And if you arrive at a situation in which you're thinking that it's not a good idea to expand at that particular time, given the economic circumstances, here are some alternatives. So let's talk about this. One possibility, if you've got a facility, can you add extra shifts or temporary workers? So, basically I temporarily increase employment, but it's not a long-term employment situation so that it's not as much of a disruption if I go into a recession and I have to go back to just my standard full-time employees. If I add shifts, again, I'm not expanding my facility. I'm just using my facility more hours of the day, right? So maybe I can get more production out of it that way. Now, if I'm doing that and I add an evening or maybe even an overnight shift, I may have to pay those folks more to do that. But it's more of a variable cost in the sense that I can back off of that if I need to later, and that's easier than if I build a whole facility. If I build a whole facility, then I got all kinds of fixed costs associated with that, and I can't easily undo that if I go into a recession. And so I'm just gonna have to live with those expenses. That's gonna be kind of a challenge. We could try to operate at above optimal levels from a speed of production standpoint. Just let's try to just churn out more with what we've got. The problem with that is you're probably going to have more error rates, more defects, things of that nature, and so that comes at a cost too. Hopefully not more injuries, but that would that's a possibility that people could get injured if they're trying to go faster, and so that may not be a good option. Um, but it's something to think about if you could, if it doesn't increase your defect rate too much, you aren't going to get more injuries. Can I just flat out run my factory faster? And yes, I'll have a few more defects, a few more rejected products, but maybe that's more economical than building a whole new facility. Maybe I use overtime. I get people to stick around for a couple, another hour or two a week, and I get a little more capacity out of that. Maybe there's some portion of my process I can outsource to other companies on a short or intermediate term basis, so that if the economy slides into a recession, that's easier for me to just cut that off and be done with it when at the end of that contract. And then I don't have a facility that I have to deal with the fixed costs for that. So it's a possibility maybe I can outsource. Maybe raising prices is an option. Now this one you got to be real careful with. So if you think about your competitive situation, if you are in a perfectly competitive economic environment, you can't raise prices because you are a price taker. In other words, you just take the price dictated by the market, and you can't raise prices. If you try to raise prices, you're just not going to sell any product, right? So if the market's perfectly competitive, this isn't going to help you. But if you are in a situation in which the market for your goods or services is not perfectly competitive, and there's some, maybe some differentiation or what have you involved, it's a possibility that if you raise prices a little bit, it would tend to lower demand. And if it lowers demand a little bit, maybe I can raise prices a little, decrease the demand just a little bit, and essentially get by with the facilities I've got. Now, you have to be very careful with that and make sure that you're not going to damage your long-term positioning, your branding. I mean, if you position your firm as, the low-cost option and then you start jacking prices up, that's very possibly a real problem from a strategic standpoint. But it might be possible to raise prices if you're not in a perfectly competitive environment. Maybe that's a possibility. Now, again, keep in mind you've got to be very mindful what the economic situation is for your goods and services before you head down that road. And it also opens up the interesting question. I mean, if you could raise prices and it doesn't decrease demand that much, maybe you should have done that before, right? So from that standpoint, it might be something that got overlooked. But if it's not a perfectly competitive market situation you're facing, it's worth exploring at least to kind of see if it would make sense for that particular situation. But there are some alternatives that you might be able to implement in order to avoid actually expanding a facility if you're concerned that you're near the top of an economic cycle. Hopefully this video has been helpful. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.